Welcome to episode 3 of Women's HERstory series on my YouTube channel, Mama Mata, History for Today. I'm so proud, privileged, and excited to share the story of this incredible indigenous woman. Her story is not often told and is rarely found in textbooks, but today we will honor her story, and I'm so happy to share it with you. So let's get started. This woman was a writer, editor, speaker, musician, educator, and a political activist, and her name is Zitkala-Sa, which translates to Red Bird in her language. Now, she was born with the name Gertrude Simmons on February 22nd, 1876, but she changed her name to Zitkala-Sa and preferred people to call her that name. She was born on the Yankton Indian Reservation with her mother. Her mother is of Sioux Dakota heritage, and her father is an Anglo-American, and not much is known about him. She died in Washington, D.C. on January 26, 1938, and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Now, throughout this episode, I will give you incredible facts and her story, and also share some resources with you along the way, such as quotes from her writings, her spoken events, and also some definitions to help along. So the definition we want to focus on right now is reservation, which means public land that was set aside for a specific use. Indian reservations were areas identified by the federal government for the Native American community. Now, let's put this in context. This was not at the request of Native American communities. This was at the forced removal from their lands and the forced occupation of said lands by the government that had ramifications that began in the 1800s and are still prevalent today. So let's get talking some more about Zitkala-Sa's life. When Zitkala-Sa was 8 years old, missionaries from Indiana came to the Yankton Reservation to recruit children for their boarding school. After debating the decision, Zitkala-Sa's mother agreed to let her go. She did not want her daughter to leave and did not trust the white strangers. But she feared that the Dakota way of life was ending. There were no schools on the reservation, and she wanted her daughter to have an education. At the time, there was restricted access for Native Americans to education and citizenship. Attending this boarding school meant that she spent years away from everything she knew. She did not know English, and tribal languages were banned at the school. The school forced her to give up her Dakota culture for an, quote, American one. This is known as forced assimilation. The definition of a boarding school is a school that provides students with food and lodging. So essentially, they are on campus 24/7. Zitkala-Sa's arrival at the school was traumatic. The children learned that everyone would get a haircut. In Sioux Dakota culture, haircuts were performed by the enemy during capture. Zitkala-Sa resisted by hiding underneath a bed in an empty room. When the staff of the school found her underneath a bed, they dragged her out, tied her to a chair, and cut off her braids as she cried out loud. Later in life, she wrote that the staff at the school did not care about her feelings and treated the children like, quote, little animals. She once was granted a visit home, but that made her sad. Like many children, she may have felt that she no longer belonged on the reservation. Life at the school had changed her. In 1895, Zitkala-Sa graduated and joined a teacher training program in Indiana, where she was one of the few Native American students. She then transferred to the New England Conservatory of Music, where she studied the violin. By 1900, she was teaching music and speech at the Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, one of the most famous boarding schools in the country. Zitkala-Sa worked at the Carlisle School for less than 2 years and began to question why the school required the children to give up their entire culture in exchange for an education. The experience reminded her of her own traumatic education. She watched a new generation of young children arrive on trains and have their hair brutally cut. She saw the staff treat children cruelly and learned that the government paid the school for every child successfully removed from a reservation. The boarding schools were designed to erase her people's culture. Zitkala-Sa channeled her frustration into a love for writing. She wrote about her personal experiences and the customs and values she had learned from her mother. Her essays and short stories were published in national magazines, and in 1901, she published a book called Old Indian Legends. She also wrote articles that exposed the traumas of boarding school, which led to criticism since she was educated by them. In 1901, Zitkala-Sa left the Carlisle School and returned to South Dakota. She took a job at the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs that supported her financially while she continued her true passion, writing stories that promoted Sioux Dakota culture. She saw herself as being a preserver of the stories of her people. The United States Bureau of Indian Affairs is an agency of the federal government that oversees all issues related to the Native American community. It is still an agency that exists today. She moved to Utah, where Zitkala-Sa worked as a teacher on a Ute reservation where children lived at home. While teaching, she met William Hanson, a music professor at Brigham Young University. In 1910, Zitkala-Sa collaborated with composer and non-native William F. Hanson to write the libretto for the first Native American opera, the Sundance Opera, based on a traditional ceremony that was made illegal. The Sundance Opera was performed in 1913 in Utah, and again in 1938 on Broadway in New York. However, it was credited only to Hanson. Zitkala-Sa combined her love of music and writing, and because many Native American customs were passed down orally through music, Zitkala-Sa believed it was a powerful way to share her family's values and reach a new audience. The sacred Sundance is a personal devotion of sacrifice in tribal dance and song. By turning this ceremony that the government had deemed illegal into an opera, she reclaimed its power that translated into white society. By 1916, Zitkala-Sa and her husband relocated to Washington, D.C., where she worked for the Society of American Indians and the American Indian Magazine. In 1926, Zitkala-Sa and her husband founded the National Council of American Indians. She also organized the Indian Welfare Committee on behalf of the National General Federation of Women's Clubs. Zitkala-Sa's relationship with the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs became strained. She fought to preserve Native American culture and believed the Bureau did the exact opposite. She brought to light many issues related to Native Americans, including education, economics, employment, health, and religion. Her political activism helped pass the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924 and the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. These laws helped Native Americans secure American citizenship and regain control of their lives from the federal government. Specifically, the Indian Citizenship Act, it was passed in 1924 and granted full citizenship to all Native Americans born in the United States. Yes, you read that right. It was not until 1924 that the United States recognized all Native Americans who were born here as U.S. citizens. The Indian Reorganization Act in 1934 was passed that decreased federal involvement in Native American life and provided the Native American community with more independence. If you would like to learn some more about Zitkala-Sa, her music, her writings, there are excellent books out there, and here's a few resources you can see. There's a children's book. There's books written about her within Indian stories. And then there's also her actual writings that you can still find today. Thank you for watching episode 3 of Women's HERstory series. I'm so honored to have shared the story of Zitkala-Sa. I hope you're inspired to share your own story. We each have one. And as always, thank you for watching. And please share, comment, like, and subscribe.